And it looks like it's live. Okay, so we had invited the chair of and the founder of Balance-Unbalance to do a very brief introduction if he's willing, and I can see him in the room there. So I'd just like to briefly hand it over to Ricardo Del Faro if he'd like to mention anything about this collaboration, and then I'll introduce what we're going to do before I hand it over to our panelists.
Yeah, just very brief. I'm very happy about this. I would be very happy to be here. But it's good to have Skype for possibilities because that's part of the idea. I remember when we were talking with Leah, and she was approaching people from Vanuatu, and also talking about all possibilities of situations that we more or less know what's going on, but we really don't know enough, and also the possibility of giving some more visibility of a lot of problems that are similar to the Vanuatu situation around the world. So that's part of what we want to do. I'm really happy that this is happening. I hope it will really help, and it's great that we can record this so we can just move these things around and not just for the people who are now exchanging here, but we keep it online for as long as possible. Thank you, Leah, for organizing this, to everyone who is online now. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Ricardo. So it is going to be, oh, I'm getting some feedback there. It is going to be Sandy that's going to formally start this panel. But before he does that, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of who we all are and what we're doing here and the kind of format that this panel is going to be. So my name's Leah Barclay. I think I know most of you in the room there, which is really nice. And of course, the person leading this panel is Sandy Sir, who is a community leader and researcher from Vanuatu who's had a very long association with Balance-Unbalance, as Ricardo just mentioned. And it's been a real privilege to work with Sandy on various Balance-Unbalance collaborations over the years, and his voice has become a very important part of this conference, I think, particularly the way he's taking incredible leadership within his community, both in the preservation and revitalization of his culture, but in really pioneering research in how this music tradition that he will talk about relates to the environment. And many of the connections between Sandy and Balance-Unbalance have been facilitated through Thomas Dick, who is with us today. Now, I don't know if you can, if I click on his screen, if you're seeing that change in the room or if it's only when our microphones are live. But Thomas is a producer, a manager, a researcher, and many other things, and has been really instrumental in facilitating these collaborations between the conference and the incredible work that Sandy is doing. And we're also very lucky to be joined by Dr. Catherine Grant from the Queensland Conservatorium. Catherine is a researcher and also many other things. And Catherine has been leading some really incredible research around music and social justice, and has recently started a new collaboration with Sandy, looking at the work and the research that he's doing around climate change and how that intersects with research and also Sandy's existing research. So we've all been collaborating in various capacities, and the idea of this panel was to be really led by the incredible work that Sandy's doing and guided by Sandy. So he will take the majority of this panel in talking about his work and his research. Then I'll talk very briefly about a collaboration that I've done with Sandy recently, and Catherine will talk about her new research project, and Tom will thread various threads through the things we've spoken about. And we want to allow plenty of time at the end for questions, and to also have a dialogue with those of you that are in the room. Certainly, many of you in the room have also worked with Sandy in different capacities. So we really want to take this opportunity as well to look to the future and how these collaborations may continue to unfold with Balance-Unbalance. So I'm very happy now to hand you over to Sandy to lead this panel. Thank you.
Favorable mingan seseret well nigan lulu le dam tana sur ne nis very nis tendun nis sambil kansen tawolugan berenulap le dam tana sur le mugan ulgulu balance no dom wen meto le nak le mugan very very sen wen le dom wen si ne vera nis gan. Thank you so much to all our audience. Yeah, again, my name is Sandy, and I think most of you have heard about me and working with me. And I'm the head of the organization or the cultural experience that named Lewaton. Lewaton is named after the two islands of Merelaba, and it's the way that I put the name together is related back to the language and the human. Like as human, we understand the value of the nature. And that's where the name Lewaton comes up and puts together. And now we're running that as a cultural experience, and it's part of a learning point for our next generation. In a big picture of what Lady said, thank you so much for your introduction about my work and my research. As my research is mainly on the ground with my performance, is mainly what I learned from the ancestors or my people that I've learned from. And it's really powerful the way we listen to our storytelling, and it becomes really our tool that we use to work along and use. And also it's like from the storytelling to the song, and it becomes one of the second thing that it manages my values, that I can understand the nature and what is the nature to us as humans. So the water music becomes one of the main platform of what I'm doing, is really reflecting the main connection between us, as we know that water is life, water is reflecting everything that we can see around us. So without water, life is not exist. So it is really important. So between that, I just put this in front of us, that we have to understand that we've got like the understanding these three main things. It is island, nature, human. But it comes around now, we call island, human, nature. So the human becomes part of the two main thing that we are on now, and we bringing up these conferences that we are part of it. And it's also like what attracts me from the balance, it means like the language name, it calls balance and balance, that we can understand clearly in English. But when you bring it back into our language, it is ndom tano sur neverang, means you understand your footstep, your own island, your own place, which is where you come from. And it's something that is surrounded with the nature. And this is what we're calling our hands. So now put the human in the center between the island and the nature. Human is the connection to these two main things in life. Every little things that comes from the creatures is the human. The human is the main source of the two things that to tell the story and protect and preserve the island and the nature. So that's why, like I said, island, nature, human, it turns the way around when human becomes something in the center to understand. It's reflecting also the two main things that we know exact, that the water, the ocean, and the island. And we have divided in lots of different islands, like we come from a small islands up in Vanuatu. And we could pick a country, continent, and with all these names that we can name to whatever. But the next thing is we have to understand where the ocean is and where the land is. So in between that, that's where the three main things come into one. So from the mountain to the ocean, it's a layer of things that we have to understand from the ocean onto the island. And that's the first step ever that people can understand that environment or the area that it's built. And from the coastal side into the land, it's like reflecting another boundary. And that's where the human come in and build villages and build the boundary there, and to live there and listen to the sound from the two nature. And that's where listening back to the ocean and listening back into the land, where you listen up into the land or into the mountain. And that's where your storytelling become. And everything that's around us is all whistling, talking. They got voice. Yeah. So as an example here, I'm just going to put it up in the front of this phone as a piece of paper that is drawn up. It's a shape of a human. And we understand that water is life. So I put water is our head. The body himself, it is where everything comes in and spread out between our hands, our legs, and our ears. So whatever you listen to the nature. It's also coming through your left ears. That is telling that's where the island, the land, is the foundation. Your leg is where the roots are, and that's where the message is passed. As soon as you move one step ahead, you're moving something to move along with you. Force can be travel when human move and talk about something. So that's when man is a connection between the two nature. I think, Lee, I'm gonna take you from here. Can you take over that from here?
Sure, yes. That was wonderful, Sandy. Thank you. I'm sure you'll all agree that that was incredibly inspiring. I've forgotten what I was actually going to talk about now because my mind's racing with all the possibilities of what you just said. But in response to that, and I guess the work that that we've been exploring together, Sandy, has also really been looking at the way that we can use technology and those intersections between art and sciences and all of the intentions of balance-unbalance in bringing together art, science, technology, and creativity as a whole to really look at responding to these issues. So as some of you are aware of, the work that Sandy and I have been collaborating in has been looking at the role that mobile technologies, particularly accessible mobile technologies, can play in responding to some of these issues. We were very lucky to have Sandy, the three of us actually, but particularly Kathy and I at the Conservatorium, to have Sandy working with us at the Conservatorium a couple of weeks ago. And Sandy was talking about engaging with young people in response to climate change and the idea that we need to be able to get inside these devices because young people are constantly connected to technology. So Sandy and I have been creating these augmented reality soundbox, drawing on the sounds and stories of Luaton and connecting them to different landscapes. And we did this, first of all, in Noosa, along the Noosa River as part of Floating Land, which is another festival that's intersected in various ways with Balance-Unbalance over the years, including the 2013 event where Sandy was present there as part of the conference. And with these sound walks, what's been really fascinating is just how it's resonated with the way that Sandy's spoken about sound and its connection to the land, our ability to take this ephemeral sonic object and use GPS to plant it at a particular location and then a mobile phone to trigger it has been very synchronous with some of the stories behind these sounds. So we've been exploring ways that we can present this work in different communities to really reduce the carbon impact of producing these large-scale artworks and explore how we can connect to other island communities that are experiencing the ramifications of climate change, but also by using sound as this embodied tool where people can connect to these environments. So connect to the sounds deep in the ocean, connect to the sounds of water music across the surface of a river. And in these experiences, it's been Sandy's voice that has threaded through these sound walks. So we did a version of this at the Invisible Places conference in Portugal, where none of us were physically present. We presented the entire project remotely, but had a local master's student on the ground help us with the install. And there was really interesting feedback from that in how the local communities of these islands in Portugal connected with the stories of Sandy's community in Vanuatu. And the most recent layers of our collaboration that have been evolving have really been, again, looking at those artistic and scientific possibilities of sound that is deeply rooted in sound's connection to the environment. So Sandy has been quite interested in how we can use sound to map environmental changes in the island. He's told us stories about how the reef just off the coast has essentially died in the past couple of years and hasn't been documented or monitored. So we're looking at how we can use sound to really document these changes, but of course bring a wider awareness to what's happening there. And one of the main projects that we've started to work on is a sound map, which we're hoping to build up various locations that Sandy's selecting in Vanuatu. And we've also spoken about the ideas of live streams. And I can see Grant Smith in the room there as well, who's just set up a live stream in the North Devon Biosphere Reserve as part of a new project, really creating this acoustic observatory. So we're very keen to connect Vanuatu into that project as well. And obviously there's some logistics to get around in terms of powering the stream and naturally the data that would be involved, but we're looking at various ways that we can connect the dots with those things. So the idea was that I just kind of briefly mentioned a couple of the projects that we're working on that connect into those big picture intentions of Balance-Unbalance, and then I hand over to Kathy or back to Sandy if he wants to respond to any of that as we move through this panel. So I don't know if you want to respond to any of that, Sandy, before we move to Kathy.
Yeah, well, my response is just like what you just mentioned before. Like we can see the difference and the climate change that we're going to talk about. People mention lots of things, but people don't see a close look at the reefs. And when the reefs are changing their colors, everything is dying down. It means the environment, the trees, it's also dying down in the coastal side. So that's what the main idea of monitoring or putting all this technology into a place where people can listen and tell their own story to connect back the areas in preserving and looking after the environment in the right way. And see the beauty of Vanuatu again in the future for the next generation.
Absolutely. So shall we move on to
Yes.
Catherine then Sandy? All right,
Yes,
excellent.
thank you.
So I'll introduce you to Catherine and hand over to you, Kathy.
Sure, thank you, Leah, and everyone. It's so lovely to be able to join you in this way. This is my first Balance-Unbalance, and yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to participate from a distance like this. So as Leah, I think, already mentioned, I'm right at the very beginning of my collaborations with Sandy and with Leah and Tom, but they've very kindly invited me to contribute just a few words about how Sandy's activities around the women's water music relates to the area of my research. And I thought maybe I could start by giving a bit of background perhaps on that topic. Very broadly speaking, it centres on the sustainability of musical practices around the world. And then I'll come full circle with a few brief thoughts on how that leads me to my current collaborations with Sandy and with Leah and Tom, and also how it relates to water music as a way to promote environmental and climate change awareness, bringing together arts and sciences creatively, as Leah and Sandy have just mentioned. So maybe first then just a little bit about this issue of the sustainability of music traditions. You may or may not be familiar with it. I think it was 2003 when UNESCO released their convention on the urgent safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage of the world. And since then, there's been a lot of research attention on how best to do that. Some of it comes from the field of heritage studies broadly. Some of it comes from research areas that focus on specific aspects of intangible cultural heritage, like music or dance or theatre or other performing arts. So my own research field is that of ethnomusicology, and please forgive the term, we recognise the challenges with it. But in ethnomusicology, these issues of music sustainability, as it's called there, have been very much on the agenda in the past 10 to 15 years or so. And ethnomusicologists, scholars in that field, recognise very much that the processes of cultural loss on the one hand and regeneration on the other, I guess a little bit like those of species loss and regeneration or environmental loss and regeneration, have been taking place throughout history, but also that today's pace and depth of change is far greater than has historically been the case. And it's been about a decade or so that I've been researching these topics of music endangerment, as it's called, and for better or worse, and music sustainability. And one thing that has struck me and over time begun to concern me a little bit was how music sustainability is often framed in scholarly research, and also to a certain extent, I think, in the rhetoric of UNESCO. And what I mean by that is that there's been a tendency to speak of the threats or the challenges to the sustainability of musical traditions or musical practices and other forms of intangible cultural heritage as somehow inevitabilities in our contemporary world. So there's talk about these unrelenting, unstoppable processes of globalization or modernization or urbanization and the rise of technology and so on. I've come to feel pretty strongly that we scholars collectively could more explicitly acknowledge that there are many situations where culture and cultural practices are under threat because of situations of social injustice. And I'd like to give just three very brief examples from beyond Vanuatu for now. I'll come back to Vanuatu in just a moment. So in Cambodia, I've seen through my research there how poverty is affecting people's capacity to make choices around their traditional culture and cultural practices. In Australia, I see how the ongoing effects of colonisation manifest in the everyday lives of our Indigenous peoples, including their traditional ceremonies and songs and other performance traditions. And as I watch the nightly news, I see how the massive displacement of people around the world, especially those escaping war or political instability, disrupts their cultural practices and indeed their cultural identities at times. So I guess I feel the need for some accountability when we're talking about the challenges facing many peoples and cultures around the world, because without accountability, there's often not responsibility taken either. I think it's quite easy for us in more privileged positions to turn a blind eye to the agency that's at play in some of the challenges and threats to the world's cultural heritage. And this, of course, is the case for climate change too. And now we start to head back to Vanuatu and to Sandy's work. It's those peoples who wield the least power in the global order who are most affected by what UNESCO has called the global cultural crisis. And as you know, that's just as it is for climate change too. And just as poverty and war and colonialism affect whether people are able to continue to practice their intangible cultural traditions, so too does climate change. And of course, climate change is an issue of social justice too. And in fact, I find it amazing that the term climate justice has been around nearly 20 years now. And I like it as a term because it highlights the fact that climate change isn't just an environmental issue, but also, of course, a political and a social and an ethical one. And I'd like to offer the term cultural justice in the same spirit, to refer to the political and social and ethical factors in the ability of Indigenous and minority and all people around the world to practice their cultural traditions freely. So I think I'll wrap up with those thoughts. I'll finally get back to Sandy just in a couple of closing comments. To my understanding, Sandy's efforts with the women's water music and the Luwutan community, they pivot around these two giant issues of social justice, climate justice on the one hand and cultural justice on the other. And Sandy, I see your work as being especially valuable and unique in a way in that it goes beyond using the water music or the other cultural traditions of your people as a tool in environmental advocacy. Often I think when arts and science meet to discuss the climate, climate is the message and culture is the medium. There's nothing wrong with that. But in Sandy's work, culture is not only being put to the service of a climate justice message, it's the very act of performing and sharing the water music locally and internationally, that in itself is in the service of climate justice, of standing against those global social injustices that make it so difficult for Indigenous peoples to keep their cultures strong. So here in this water music project that Sandy's been leading and in collaboration with Leah and Tom, I see cultural justice and climate justice going so much hand in hand. And I really think these two things are like two wings of the same bird, so that any efforts towards climate justice are also efforts towards cultural justice and vice versa. And I guess that's the perspective on Sandy's efforts that I hope and plan to explore with him and with Leah and Tom and with the Luwutan community a little bit further through my research in the coming months. But with that, I'll close there and maybe pass it back to you, Leah, or you, Tom, or Sandy, indeed.
Sure, thanks, Kathy. That was wonderful. And I mean, I think, obviously resonates so well with Sandy's work, but also the overall balance-unbalance concept in truly recognising that climate change is not an ecological crisis. It's a cultural crisis, and we've quoted Timothy Morton so many times throughout Balance-Unbalance and sort of looking at recognising those deeply ingrained, unsustainable ways of thinking as well. Sandy, do you want to respond at all or comment on any of that before we go to Tom?
Well, I would say thank you to Kathy for elaborating on her research upon the water music. Again, like I said before, we just put it this way, like the water is going to be up here, and we need this connection to be right. So in part of sharing all this with you guys, it's really important for us just to understand those things that nature creates culture. So that's one thing to Indigenous, that's how we survive and believe that that's where we come from. And that's where our message comes from. So yeah, like we can do anything, but don't forget that nature is human. And it's really important that these two things have to work together to create something alive. So if we destroy, the end of it is just like you destroying our Mother Earth. So that's why it comes about from the water music and the woman, that our human mother is reflecting our Mother Earth. Like our human mother carries a lot of all these things in life, which is reflecting our Mother Earth. So that's why, like, when women are performing the water music, they tell the story. They're giving us the story through the two nature, and that's where it becomes really important in roles of that, nature and culture is always there. So once you start destroying the nature, you're destroying the culture, and we just looking at like the nature and the culture is working off the edge, this is what is causing all this climate change, these all this connection between these two natures. So yeah, thank you so much, and I'll pass it back to you, Leah.
Thanks.
So we might hand over to Thomas Dick now, who, as I mentioned earlier, has been quite instrumental in establishing this long-term collaboration with Sandy. So over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Leah. Thanks, Sandy. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, everybody. That's a really a tough act to follow and try and thread together, especially given that everybody did a very good job of threading themselves together anyway. I think, first of all, I think it's really worth acknowledging the Mwalap language that Sandy spoke at the start of the presentation. It's just really good to hear vernacular languages, Indigenous languages being spoken in many different fora, and really great for this one in particular to be spoken in this particular forum, which is disembodied as it is, but also embodied as it is, because language is both of those things. I think it's made more significant by what Leah is talking about, by the intentionality of Balance-Unbalance as a conference, as an event, and as a coming together, as a connection, as a thing that connects people, all of us in particular. Leah was at pains, I think, to really emphasize Sandy's voice as critical to everything that she's doing, which stands to reason, in the fact that she's an acoustic researcher, and artist, sound artist. I really like Sandy's response to some of Leah's comments, where he said it's all about telling stories to see the beauty. And Sandy connects the storytelling back through the ancestors and through the performance of the culture. He also talked quite a lot about the reflexivity, the reflexive nature, the reflexive relationship between nature and culture, between water and life. He was pretty much making that point over and over again in many different ways, many beautiful ways, and wrapped it up in that idea of telling stories to see the beauty, which sort of emerges from this idea of Leah. Did you actually say something about an acoustic observatory? Does such a thing exist?
I did say that. It probably wasn't the term that we've been using to describe the project, but there are acoustic observatories that exist in a scientific context. But yes, that is the term I used.
Well, I love the dissonance that creates. But of course, observatory is, from the Latin to not just to watch, but to attend to, and that really speaks to what I think we're all talking about in being present with sound, being present in place. Especially from Sandy's perspective, where the Luwitan community is an embodiment of a range, like a whole set of different, like multiple emplacements of a people who come from the island of Merilava, and then Gower, and then Santo, and then perform their emplacements in these different locations, which I think speaks really interestingly to Kathy's idea of cultural justice and how it is a performed and embodied idea. I'm really really like what you're saying there, Kathy, and like the work that you're doing to make yourself accountable in that too, and by looking at the orientation of things like loss and regeneration, endangerment and sustainability. And if do you mind, I'd actually like to ask Kate a quick question, because I can see her in the audience there, about particularly that idea of loss and regeneration, and what role do you think that the work that we do can have in terms of bridging that idea? Because these are really, they're not like you said, Kathy, they're not it's not one or the other, and it's not a continuum either. It's not this linear relationship. It goes back to what Sandy's talking about, this reflexive kind of relationship where the one depends on the other. There is some loss and there is some regeneration. And while at the moment there's perhaps, the issues that are perhaps weighing it one way, what work can we do you think, Kate, in terms of preparing for a future where one day we need something or another to remember or regenerate? What can we do now to prepare, to help Sandy prepare for regeneration, or to prepare ourselves for regeneration?
Well, I think we can work together and really embrace that. And I really loved this way of speaking about beauty and telling stories to see the beauty. I feel like lifting the conversation about the climate out of crisis, anxiety crisis, which doesn't really mobilize anyone to do anything apart from get very depressed. And grief is a vital thing, but the work that we're all thinking about, I think, is about how to help people connect with the stories of their land, so that they hold the stories in their own bodies, so that they are the story holders and part of the nature that they live in. And I really appreciate that you guys have been thinking about teenagers and young people. I've been thinking a lot about that, developing the 360 videos that are made out in the Luton community, and coming at it much more from a visual perspective. You are such audio experts, but I have a love of the visual field, and have been working in a site in Scotland with some teenagers there, using, and this is early days, it's been quite hard to find funding for this, and I've realised as I've tried to make the project how difficult it is to make outdoor ritual virtual reality projects without a support network. But the way that we've just gone through it is starting with the ritual element itself. So being out on the land and connecting with the stories, even if we're just telling stories to each other at the moment, it's not so high tech. And now incorporating the 360 video that we took of the water music into this mix, so that the kids in Scotland are so interested about other communities, and that sense of being global citizens and sharing the fact that we have this climate situation. It's not a problem that is simply for people who are affected now. And there's this, I guess, digital communication, and that shift is showing us, that connection of that we can hold that global reality, and kids are growing up with that global reality. But we also have to really work at trying to understand and understanding the differences between people and the stories that we carry, and the different stories of the land. So I just feel like connections like this, the connection that Tracy has been creating with her Scans Canberra event, and continuously coming back into connection with what we're developing and what we're doing, and then making sure that we're really working in our particular communities as well as on some sort of conceptual level to open up this like living communication of being part of a beautiful earth but also being living in a particular place, and in that particular place, there's particular stories. There's something about stories. You know?
Absolutely, yeah, that's right. I might throw back to Sandy. I'm interested in, Sandy, how would you tie some of these ideas together, about in particular in relation to ritual? So the obviously the water music itself is it fits within the a series or a suite of rituals within the culture, the Mwalap culture and the Luwitan heritage. How important is the ritual of storytelling to you and your community?
Well, it's going to be something that it's going to be really powerful in a way if we do it and play it in a community or to the right people to listen to, first of all, because what I said, because it's just because from the time when I was learning lots of my storytelling from the old people, like generation to generation, it's been something that it's been wicking everything down. I'm the fourth generation to learn from my third generation of my great-great-grandfather. That's all I learned. So from there, it got a little bit of the story. So the storytelling that I want to put together that's going to be keep back to the villages or to the island is by putting together in the ways that, yeah, now like Kate, sorry, Kate, I didn't realize that before. Yes, with Kate's work, which is something that, because the kids are using, like I said, I say something delay about the phone. Why can't we interfere into that phone by the storytelling and about the climate change by telling them what's happening? So the storytelling becomes the first thing. I think that's the best tool ever to create this, to build the relationship between the younger generation. Do they get themselves connected back to their native life or the nature, the culture? So the storytelling could be made in books or through what Kate is trying to over the 360 tools or whatever we try to organize that to back to the community. Did I answer that, Tom? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. No, it's really interesting there, and it speaks very much, Leah, to the intersection of, as you say, the intersection of technology and culture and all of these sort of ideas, especially in relation to people who are living on the edge of the or on the front lines of climate change, I suppose. So I'll hand back over to you. I'm not sure how much time there is left. I can go on. How much time is there, David?
There's another 15 minutes.
10 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Minutes, yeah.
Can I just ask Sandy one more question then?
Of course.
Thanks, Sandy. I'd just like to hear you speak a little bit about all of this, what we're talking about in relation to the South Sea Island community. Because I think that, like, for me, one of the main things that I'm interested in is the connections, the deepening of connections between people around the world, and how we can achieve that in all these different ways without necessarily, as Kathy says, without necessarily flying around the world and creating more and more carbon impacts. But I'm interested in the connections that you have with the South Sea Island community in Australia.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Tom. While working with this by you, Tom, when you organized the Leeuwarden group over, and that's when it started to make me feel like, oh, okay. I thought only me thinking about starting Leeuwarden to do the Leeuwarden cultural experience to teach the next generation behind my back. And that's all I think of. And when I found out this, when we traveled here for the 150th anniversary, and that's when we connected by or knowing what they tried to name the tribes, their name was named after like little things, plastic bag, whatever they kind of call them in English. But the name that some of them they still got in their mind, which is it's related back to the land where the ancestors come from. So that's when, like when they say something in language, it, I mean, the name in trying to pronounce the language, I just get it up straight away and said, yeah, this is your name because, yeah, it is already telling me that pronunciation, it's connecting back to where you come from. And it's related to this story. And again, it comes from like a storytelling part of it. To become a human, you have to have a story, like a story of a bird, a hill, a shark, a hiccup. So all these things are related. So once you start telling your stories, you're already connecting yourself to where you come from, where your tribes are connected to. And again, it relates to a storytelling apart from putting a family together, like we call in English, totem, or your, how you're reflecting. So the pitching or whatever, the movement, it reflects your tribes. So where you come from. And that's where you are related to. So that's when we really interesting when I started working with the South Sea Islanders back in 2013, getting all these stories, and that's when it connect myself and say, all right, right? That's where you come from. You're not from this place, you're from this place. This is the name comes from this place or this island. So again, that's where it reflects our nature and the two powerful nature that is still alive around us. So something that's under the water, it's above the land, reflecting lots of meaning, and that's where we learn from.
Yeah, I just think that's so fascinating. I really like how that there's something really beautiful there, Kathy. I'm not sure if you caught all of that or how familiar you are with the South Sea Islander story. But I just think there's the overlaying of the idea of the sustainability of music traditions with some of those connections, those collective kind of the collectivity of cultural justice for Melanesian people in this part of the world, I think is really fascinating. And some of the work Sandy's done in that regard is I mean, it'll come to fruit in future years. But particularly using music and song and dance and stories to connect people who have been dislocated from each other is really, really interesting, really fascinating.
And also language. We had conversations, Sandy, about the importance of value and also the interconnections of language. And just listening to your talk, Sandy, you remind me again of how fundamental language, not only stories, but also particularly stories in language are.
Yeah, for sure. Like language is something like we say, it becomes name of something. Like I said, Neverang means your island. It's your heart. It's you. So when you speak that language, it means it's you. That's why I try to use music to correct my home island, by creating the book, the music that we're going to do the recording. And that's where we whip the story and it becomes built. How the story from the family here we call Dung Dung, and we call Dung Dung in Merelava. And how that's whipped through? Well, it whips through a story under the water, the creek, and it becomes a creek. We call him Kwang Dung Dung. They call him Wasiang Dung Dung in Motlap. So look with the space, and it dives down to the sea, it dives up to the island, and that's when I get that story and said, well, we are connected. So everything that whips through the story underwater, the birds travel from above, they talk to each other, and it waves across. And that's the language. And it's just the tone of the language. That's why the music, people say, that's my music, that's my music. That's when we get all this collision in argument with the rights of the dance, the songs, and all this. But again, if we revert back to the story, we're just like connecting ourselves. It's not a difference between each one. like a Banks group is a group of island. But every time I listen to what we speak or we say something, it's just a bit of a slang that it's sweep away. But the main thing that we're talking about is only one. And that's when I said, water is a connection. It reflects, it weaves the sound. And it just by the end of that sound, it wings around. And in our language, we say, that's when it twists. Sorry, I'm speaking language, but all this thing is related to language. Like we say, balance and balance. Just like from your face of your hand to the back of your hand. That's balance and balance. We want to balance that, yes.
Can you say that again, Sandy? How do you say balance, unbalance in language? I think that should be the name for the conference in the future. One iteration of the conference.
Well, no, Dungver is the next conference.
The sound of the island.
Sound of the island. Dungveri means sound of the island. Yes. Tell your own story. Tell your own connection to your land. And that's how I said it reflects. It's unbalanced if we balance him by our story and songs together with travel.
Beautiful.
And that's thank you.
Thank you, Sandy.
So we only have a couple of minutes left. I mean, I think that was a really beautiful way to finish, but we did want to open it up for some questions. Do we still have time? If I can see Tracy with her hand up. Do we still have time, David?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, okay, excellent.
Tracy.
I always have my hand up. Look, there's so many things I could connect with, but when Kathy was talking, some of the issues around music sustainability and engagement just made me think at a pragmatic level about the National Indigenous Recording Project and Ara Eritija, which is in Central Australia. And I'm wondering, as sort of maybe you guys have talked about this, is the potentiality of using a model like Ara Eritija to maybe preserve some of the of that cultural heritage and language and ceremony for Vanuatu. I understand that it's a tool now that's was actually a one machine 20 years ago, and now it's a distributed open source knowledge tool. And I'm quite interested on your thoughts, or if you'd actually discussed anything around those issues. Anyway.
That might be an invitation to talk about the recording project, Sandy or Tom.
Oh, well, sorry, I didn't get your question, Tracy. It's been really fun.
I can speak to it very quickly and then try and hand over to Sandy. The Ara Iricha and the Mulka project is another one up in Yukala in Arnhem Land. There's some really great projects where communities have recorded a lot of their music and stories, Sandy. Lots and lots of them, and lots of videos, lots and lots and lots. And so Kathy's suggesting that maybe that's a bit similar to the work that you've been doing already with with me and my research and the production of the video, but also with what you're about to be doing with David Bridie and the production of the book with Delhi and that kind of thing.
Oh, I missed that though. Sorry.
Tell us about the project with David Bridie.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, with David Bridie. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Tracy. Sorry, I couldn't get you really clear, but the work with David Bridie is just recording the music, and also we try to get the stories behind the music, and putting all this like to become like a ZD, and also with the story in a booklet. But apart from that, we continue to do more research behind that, as we're going to do more collective, as Don just mentioned, a project that we're doing now with Delhi. We're writing a book regarding writing a story in the language back into a booklet to provide back to the schools so that they can learn the language. And it's an ongoing thing. I've already collected some information from the islands that I want to work on and get things done. So that's one part of it. If David Bradley comes up, that's what we're doing. We're doing recording all the songs, the traditional instrument. What does the instrument talk through the sound, the rhythm, and what's the story behind the song, and what's the beat, the rhythm that they're playing? Because that's, like I said, it's been really protected, and it's not really something that we're going to protect it, but we're going to share and keep the meaning behind that. And that's what the boundary is, how it's going to be passed on, or it's going to be from this generation to that generation. So there's a story that reflects everything. So it's part of a recording, a CD, and also a bit of a documentary on books and DVD as well, what he want to do.
Thank you, guys.
Does anybody else want to comment on that question, or we can open up to any other questions?
Happy to open up to other questions.
Open up. Anybody else have a final question? Any comment?
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's something about play. I'm sitting next to Iris and remembering how she was so warmly embraced when we were at the Luton community, and they just ran around gardens exchanging games. And the completely uncomplicated nature of people understanding how to create together, even when they come from such different worlds. And I guess just holding that up with this notion of beauty that has been spoken to and play, that feels what's going to be live in communicating something which gives people creative agency and that kind of remembrance of their own place in the world. And thank you so much. I'm so honoured and delighted and grateful to be a part of this community.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Any comments from anyone on the panel? Otherwise, we wouldn't round things up.
I think we're almost at time, aren't we? I mean, I'd just like to say thank you to Catherine and Tom for being on this panel, and a special thank you to Sandy for taking such a leadership in all these contributions you've been making to Balance-Unbalance over the years. I hope you feel that Balance-Unbalance brings some kind of value to the work that you're doing, and it's certainly brought an incredible value to the conference to have your voice as an important part over the next few years. I'll let Catherine and Tom, and you, of course, Sandy, say any last words if you would like. But I mean, to also close by saying you're welcome to visit the Luton community. You can find out more online on the link on the abstract on the website, and I'm sure you will be hearing more from Sandy and his community at Balance-Unbalance in the future. We're certainly hoping to host more of these virtual panels and a range of events in the future. So I'll let anyone else say anything to close, but I'll just say thank you very much.
Thank you, Leah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Sandy, thanks, Tom.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks to the founder of the Balance-Unbalance.
Excellent. Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.